Welcome to Conversations with Educators, where we bring educators from across the country to talk about topics like college and career readiness, graduation tracking, teacher growth, assessment coordination, master scheduling, staffing, and more. Let's get started.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us kicked off with our webinar today, which is Conversations with Educators, Empowering Teacher Growth Through Collaboration. And super excited to have Dr. Brian Davis here with us. And what we're really looking at today is how we can involve teachers in that process and also make them feel like they're really a part of it. It's one thing to say that, something completely different to actually do it. So first is to introduce you to Dr. Davis. We're going to give him a minute in just a second to introduce himself. And then we're going to look at our guiding question today. That's really going to direct the conversation. And then at the end, we want to make sure that there's time for you to ask questions, follow up on some things. So there is a Q&A. So Dr. Davis, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Certainly. Thank you. And I'm super excited to be here and talk about something that I think is just really one of the more important pieces of what we do, but also one of the more challenging to do well, which is teacher evaluation, how you actually build that kind of collaborative nature of growth. But for myself, I'm heading into year 20 of education, which is hard to believe. I've been an admin for 12 now. I've worked in a small rural school. I've worked in large urban schools. I'm currently in a large urban, very diverse school. North Central is 37% African-American, 31% white, 22% Hispanic, with a 55% free and reduced lunch population. So we have challenging kiddos, and we love them, and we love trying to figure out how to best serve them. So this is very near and dear to my heart and the work I do here. But it's also something that was the focus of my research. It's something that myself as a teacher, I always wanted feedback and wanted to know how I could get better. So I when I got into a leadership role, I really wanted to think about how I could impact the evaluation piece and impact what's happening in classrooms in a positive way. So previous district, I led the complete overhaul of the evaluation tool that we use as a district. As a second year admin, that was a little ambitious of me. But this is something that I am very passionate about, and I think is one of the more important things that we do. So I'm happy to be here, happy to speak to my pieces of it, and share my experiences.
Yeah, I love that. So many times it's like checking a box. And I get that as administrators, we get really busy and we have this long list of things to do. But it's really important, like you said, to make sure that there's that buy-in. So the goal today is to talk about how are we able to, as administrators and educators, to make it more of a collaborative piece with our teachers. That's going to really highlight the fact that this is about learning and that it's a process that we're doing together. Get rid of that thought of like the dog and pony show or it's a gotcha. So the question today, how can administrators and educators collaboratively establish our learning environment where teacher growth and development are valued, supported, and celebrated? So Dr. Davis, if you want to start by sharing a little bit of background about the research that you did and how you feel that applies to this guiding question.
Sure. So I want to give some context for the timing of my research, as well as the timing of my shift into leadership in the building. In 2011, the state of Indiana changed their eval process from one where if you were past 5 years in the classroom and had been deemed efficient, you could basically submit a professional development plan for yourself. That was your evaluation. You got it literally check the box to start the year, check the box to end the year. And in 2011, legislation was passed to shift that. So as many states have done and are in the process of doing, Indiana went away from this model of just compliance essentially to we as admin were expected to be in classrooms conducting evaluations on teachers who may not have been evaluated in 20, 30, 40 years. This all coincided with my transition from a classroom teacher developing the rubric for my district to the only AP in a building doing all of the evaluations for that small high school. As you can imagine, that was bumpy. But that it was also at the same time as me starting my dissertation or my doctoral work. And that really led me to want to figure out how we could do what we need to do in a way that was productive. So I dug into that. My research was based on the cross-section of the evaluation adjustment model and teacher identity. So essentially, how were teachers making sense of the work that they were doing in their classrooms in this new space where everyone was being observed and evaluated in a way that many had not been for a very, very long time. So That's really what I dug into. And I found some things that I think have helped me better understand how to approach conversations in that space and how to approach the work that needs to be done. And some things that just help me understand, where people are in their process. And everyone is a little different along the way, and everyone has different nuances. So, that's what I intend to share with the group today, is just what I found that I thought was productive, and then some tips just that I have found to be useful over the years.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we see a lot of times there's legislation changes that have a really big impact on teachers and adjust the way that we as administrators do our work, but they're not necessarily involved in that process or aware of those changes. And then all of a sudden it's like their world is turned upside down. So I think it's going to be interesting to hear kind of the impact that that had, especially for those seasoned teachers that aren't used to being evaluated, having someone in their classroom. And it often, it can feel, if it's not done correctly, it can feel like someone's in there judging you. And we really are attached to, so much of who we are is attached to our teaching.
Mhm.
So yeah, share some of those findings that you came across.
Sure. So one of the things you just touched on is was very accurate across everything that I read and researched. Teachers take what they do very personally, and because we're passionate about what we do, we take it home at night, even if we try not to. There are stories of kids that come home with us that, we are trying to figure out how to help, and things that need to be graded, and so on and so forth. So that was not surprising, but that was definitely a common theme throughout, I think, every article I read that had to do with teacher identity, is just that it is where a lot of us live very, very wholeheartedly. But there were a few things beyond that I thought were really productive for me to know and learn as a young administrator, and things that I've tried to share with my team when I work with them on evaluation pieces. One of the first things was there's essentially three primary influences that help develop one's identity as a teacher. And the three categories, and I'll talk through them a little bit, but you'll be able to kind of pull away what they are. Professional, which is your social and policy expectations of being a leader. These are largely state specific. These are going to be political agendas, state standards, whatever the evaluation system is for the state, or whatever the state mandates to be part of that evaluation system. But those are kind of the bigger scale things, right? Those are your wide scope of things. Narrow it down a little bit more to your situational, which is your socially located aspects of the classroom, school, and district. Again, I have been in small southern Indiana. I'm currently in Indianapolis, and one of the largest high schools in the state. The landscape is different. The nature of the politics of a small town is very different than the nature of the politics of the big city. So those pieces, really understanding, how those come into play. I'll never forget telling the guys on the fence at the football game in the small town that they couldn't be on the fence, and that was not the right thing to say.
How dare you?
Yeah, I definitely lost that battle very quickly. But that's okay, because that's part of the nuances in that situational piece for that location. And then the personal, and I think this is the one that becomes the hardest to stay in positive headspace with sometimes with the world that we're in. The personal is really your why. It's, why did you go into education? Why are you here? Why do you get up every morning and come to work and do the work that we do? And it becomes challenging because we know that there are different avenues that provide negative views on what we do. So it's important. I remind young teachers, I meet with a cohort of young teachers every semester, and I always remind them, tell them to give me their why, and then remind them that they need to keep that at the forefront of everything. Like, I can still tell you why I got into education. It still drives me every day. Are there days where we go home and we go, oh my goodness, what happened? Absolutely. But those three pieces are really kind of the biggest influencers on how we make sense of ourselves as teachers. So that's your professional, situational, and personal. Beyond that, this is the piece that I thought really was an interesting thing for me, and it won't be surprising probably for many, but it is something I had not seen it kind of laid out in this manner. So the career stages of identity and the characteristics that go along with them were very interesting to me. And my research was across, probably should have said this initially, was across 3 buildings that were all large urban high schools. They were just the English department. I was an English teacher, so I just, bugged my people with my research. But I did a group conversation with them to kind of talk through the evaluation process and get feedback. And then I interviewed 3 teachers that were all at different stages. One had to be 0 to 5, one had to be 6 to 10, and then one was 11 or more. And it was interesting. The conversations were definitely pretty consistent actually across, but I pulled them apart based on experience, based on these career stages. So I'm not going to go real deep into the specific labels. It's definitely out there, and there are several different iterations of it, but I do think it's important to note the years that kind of are associated with them, and where the teacher typically goes with their process and their professional kind of just mindset. So no surprise, 1 to 3 years is painful or easy beginnings. That made me laugh. But it's 1 to 3 years is really survival mode. We
Mhm.
all, and that's any job. I think, my first year as an AP, that was definitely survival mode again. But 1 to 3 years as a classroom teacher, you're just getting in, you're figuring out how things work. And you get a little bit of a reality check. Most of us go into it either because we love kids or we love the content. But the reality is it is a very political job, and there are pieces of it that go along with it that I had culture shock when I started as a teacher. So your 4 to 6 years is stabilization is really when you're getting not a grip on things, but you've got enough under you that you feel like you know what you're doing every day when you come in. If something goes wrong, you're not going to get thrown off your game. You're going to be able to stay pretty much the course that you intended when you set out that morning. 7 to 18 years, there's two routes that typically happen. One is experimentation or activism, which is trying different materials, different student groupings. Basically, you've done this long enough that now you're trying to find a way to do it that's new and exciting to you, kind of thing. And I think that's pretty consistent. I see that a lot. And the other, unfortunately, is reassessment and self-doubt. A growing sense of monotony, particularly between years 12 and 20. Thoughts of leaving teaching, but then realizing that if you don't do that, like right now, it's not going to be worthwhile to leave teaching. So that's where that why becomes important. Again, you have to go back to why we're here and why we do what we do. 19 to 30 do kind of the same thing. There's two splits. You get the serenity is what they call it. More mechanical, relaxed, self-accepting. If something goes wrong, no one's going to come in and probably yell at you about it. You just, you're kind of cruise control. And then conservatism, excuse me. You kind of go the other route and you are resisting anything that changes, resisting anything building leadership is giving you, more concerned with holding on to what you've always done than what may be in the best interest of kids, or the building, or, just the changes in general that happen over time, right? And then 31 to 40 years, I really don't like that there's only one category for this, but disengaging from investment in work, and you're either serene or bitter. There's not you're either leaving on a term where you see yourself riding off into the sunset happy, or you're, going down in a blaze of glory. And I think those pieces to me were very interesting, especially, I'm kind of at the cusp now heading into years 19 through 30. So I got to figure out where I'm going to land in there. But I think those combined with the three major influences were really kind of the backbone that I took into my research to better understand the responses I was getting from people and be able to kind of categorize where they were in that process.
Did you share with any of the people you're talking to those categories? I think that's really interesting. Like, are teachers aware of where they fall in that, and can they relate to?
I did not. And actually, my chair, I ended up scrapping that portion of my research because my chair felt like it wasn't as relevant as the other. But as I was preparing for this, I just kept going back to that because it was so interesting to me. And if you're sitting with a teacher that you're evaluating who's been doing this for 15 years, you can use that to better understand how to kind of approach that conversation, right?
Exactly.
And that's the piece that for me I thought was really intriguing. And as I've worked as an admin and done evaluations, I really try to keep that somewhere in the back of my mind. It just makes the conversations easier to kind of approach.
Yeah, and I think when you said that part about like someone that's disengaged or someone that's really set in their ways, we can all think of someone immediately like, oh yes, I remember observing that teacher. But when you go into it with that mindset, it's great to say, okay, this is where they're coming from. A lot of time there's fear that's associated with that. And then to approach it that way. That's great. I wanted to know, did you find if when you were working, was there a certain group of teachers that you feel like were more receptive to feedback within those different categories?
Not really. In general, they wanted the feedback. That was actually one of the things that I found was interesting, was there wasn't the resistance to feedback that I thought there would be. There was more if you're going to give me feedback, make sure it's worthwhile. But they appreciated that professional discourse. That was probably one of the biggest themes that I took out of my research, was that the importance of making time for these things to happen and prioritizing them, but B, having conversation about what you saw and helping them see what you see as a fly on the wall in their room, even if they do the dog and pony show, which frankly, I don't care. I'm going to be in your classroom enough that at some point I'm going to see more than that. But that was very telling to me, because that was something that would not have been happening under the old evaluation model. And honestly, was one of the things that I think in the building I was working in as a teacher at the time, they were the most hesitant about, which was, kind of this, well, how can a former math teacher evaluate an English teacher? I'm here to tell you good instruction is good instruction. You can see I've gone in Latin classrooms, which I had far from literate in, and can tell you whether what's taking place is good instructional practices. And I think that was one of the big pieces of apprehension when the legislation went through was, well, how is this going to work? And what we found out is that it does work, but there has to be training, there has to be consistency and norming across the building. Like I'm one of 10 admin in my building that does evaluations. So it's important for me to kind of lead that group. And that's not counting our department chairs, but kind of lead that group and say, okay, let's norm, let's go walk a classroom and come out and make sure we're in similar ground, because you're never going to be 100%, but it's important that you're close.
I totally agree. And a lot of times you can see those discrepancies where someone comes into a class and they get a great score, or all their people are receiving these excellent scores, and it does create a lot of hostility. So you talked about that norming. We refer to it as calibrating. Like we would sit and have you ever done where you watch a video and you then kind of all rate?
Yep. We did that. I worked with the new teacher program for a summer, and that was definitely part of kind of the onboarding was norming and processing like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, sometimes we're definitely not seeing the same thing, and to have those conversations. I do want to shift. Brian, do you have anything else you want to add before we shift into the Q&A?
Let me touch on just real quick the things that I think are important in building rapport through these processes, and then I'll be good.
Please.
And I will go through relatively quickly, but again, they're not anything super surprising. Transparency, be open and upfront. The gotcha mentality is going to exist unless you squash it by being transparent with people. Accountability, hold teachers, both good and bad, to consistent expectations for behaviors. Also hold ourselves accountable for if we put it on someone's calendar that we're coming in, we do everything in our power to be in there at that time. Specificity, this was something I was told very early on. Specific numbers of students, specific behaviors observed. If you have 28 kids and 2 kids are on their phone, that's how you script it and what you provide the teacher, because that gives them exactly what was happening. Frequency, just be in classrooms beyond just when you're doing the observation. That the more you're in, the more people will be comfortable, the more the conversations become more easy to have. And it just helps all the way around. And the last one is just avoid emotional statements of any sort. There is definitely a difference between "I love that you do this" and "Miss Q effectively engages with students." And that's, again, these will oftentimes feel a little good.
It's so hard sometimes to remove that emotion, but you're right.
It is, but you have to, because the minute you start putting that type of qualifier in there, you're not looking at what's on the rubric, you're looking at what your emotions are. And emotions, unfortunately, cannot be part of this. Like, you can love these people, you can support these people, but you have to keep it professional and stay out of that space when you're doing evaluations.
Yes, I definitely agree. I love all those points that you just touched on. So we have a couple of questions that I think are just going to kind of keep this conversation going around what we were just talking about. One of them was talking about that they also meet with new teachers as they come into the profession, just to kind of help them, get acclimated, and wanted to know if there was a tool that you found in your research that helped you to guide these teachers to being more open to your feedback or listening and responding to it.
I don't know that there was a tool. I think the advice that I give our team and admin that I've worked with is basically to keep it away from emotional, because that just muddies things. But to try and be supportive in ways like, I will never tell a teacher that I saw something I didn't like unless I have a way to coach them on what I would like to see them do. So that's probably your best advice with that, is anytime you're going to give feedback that something needs to improve, don't give it in a way that doesn't give possibilities for how it can improve. For me personally, I am all about how can we shift the onus of learning off the teachers and away from the sage on the stage to the kids in the classroom doing the work. So every evaluation I do, I give, hey, have you thought about trying to group kids like this, or thought about trying to approach the conversation this way that will open up more dialogue so you can get a better feel for where all your kids are. I think that's the conversation is critical there. That's where that has to be face to face. Anytime I give a teacher feedback that I know they're not going to like, I give them the heads up before it hits the evaluation tool. I will ask them to come talk and say, hey, I want to give you the heads up that you're going to see yellow in these categories. Here's why. We'll talk about it more when we, after the eval is done, but I did not want you to be surprised by that. And I think that helps. Again, nobody loves to hear that they need to get better at something, but if you do it in a way that is humane with people, I rarely have issues with that.
Do you ever send links or resources for them when you're providing that feedback?
I have. I've done a couple different things. I've given, articles that are just real quick reads. Again, I don't want to give 50-page homework, but a 2-page, strategy from something that I've read or something that I've used, or, point them to videos on occasion if I have one that's readily available to use. But I've incorporated that typically more when it's a consistent behavior that's problematic. So if I'm in 3 times and every time classroom management of these 3 things is problematic, I want to give you something so that you can work on getting better, because clearly the conversations we're having isn't just moving that needle. So what else can I provide you with to push you in that direction?
Yeah, I love that. So you talked about those different categories that teachers fall into, and even within the categories inside a rubric, like we know, where they're at on highly effective. Do you ever have conversations, like maybe it would be in your pre-conference where you're using probing questions to kind of understand where the teacher's at before?
Yes, absolutely. And the building I'm in currently, when I came in, this was a push for me to pull into the admin team. When I came in, only department chairs did evaluations, and that was immensely problematic in my eyes. So we have shifted that, but in shifting that, it created some, we'll just say, some tense feelings. So my directive to our team last year was, you have to do the pre-conference, because that conversation is so important, because this is all new to our people. And we have guiding questions like from the district that is just kind of pre-questions. But really the biggest things I tend to ask are, how are you going to know when they know what you want them to know? What do you want them to know? And, what do you want me to look for specifically to support you? And that tends to be, you'll get teachers say nothing, and you'll get others that say, I'm really struggling with whatever. And then you go in with eyes specifically to support the teacher. And again, that's well received, because you're hearing their needs and trying to meet them.
Can you think of a change, like a time where you saw a significant change in behavior when you had provided that feedback with a teacher?
Yes. So we had a math teacher, who was just struggled with classroom management. He was first year teacher, and wanted to be, stereotypical, wanted to be buddy with everybody, but also was still trying to figure out his role in the classroom. And the chair and I and myself met with him multiple times, gave him, again, those specific pieces, some reading things to do, some classrooms to go observe, which is probably one of the most powerful ways to help people kind of get a grasp on how they can get better in certain things, is if someone in your building is fantastic at classroom management, send them to that person. One of the biggest eye openers for myself as an admin was just to go into all the different classrooms and the different content areas and see how things operated. So, but really we met with him. I believe we met bi-weekly just to check in. If he didn't have anything and we didn't have anything, it was just a, hey, how you doing? Okay, great.
Yeah.
But it helped keep him kind of on track for what we had asked him to do. And he's definitely much improved in that. It's not, when we went in before, there were just nothing that was atrocious to the point of, being written up, but things that were problematic for the learning for everyone. And when you go in now, it's pretty rare that you see those things. He has found a balance where he can still kind of have that rapport with kids that is so important to him, but also have control of his classroom, which he did not for a minute. And I've had that on the other end of the spectrum too, where I had a English teacher, who was probably in the 30 plus year range. And he was one that fought with me right out of the gate, because he wanted to be highly effective in every category. And we got to a place where I was seeing some evolution in what he was doing, and he realized I wasn't completely nuts with everything I was telling him. So, that was a win in my book, because we started moving things in a positive direction for our kids.
Yeah, I love that. Especially, when you have those people that are resistant to that change, but you can get them to see, like, I am coming from a good place. Like, I want to help you be the best teacher that you can be. You mentioned something just now about having teachers go to evaluate other teachers, and I love that. Have you had luck with peer evaluations? And if so, how did you incorporate those into your evaluation system?
So we haven't had a peer evaluation system here. Where I left, they were in the process of, they were doing really intense instructional coaching based on some Marzano things, go figure. But it was really good. And a big part of that was that you had to go into other classrooms, and you had to kind of work with people to evaluate each other, not in a way that would impact your overall evaluation, but just to give each other feedback. And I loved that. I was there for almost 8 years. We got to a point where I could walk in with 6 or 7 people and no one would bat an eye. The kids didn't care. The teacher, like, no pause in anything. And it sounds crazy, but it was a space where I felt like we were genuinely moving toward teachers looking to each other to get better. And I think here we have instructional coaches that have taken on a really pivotal role this year. But what I'm going to continue to push that we need to have teachers getting in each other's classrooms. And I know that's hard with time. I know it's hard with a lot of different things, but it's like anything else. If we prioritize it, it happens. If we don't, it doesn't.
Yeah. And I love what you said, like where they just get used to it. Like that's when you know you're doing it right, when you can walk into a room with a group of people and no one cares.
It was comical when you'd walk in and we'd all be suited up and the kid in the back row would go, whoa, what happened? You know, but
Who's in
more often than
trouble?
not, they didn't bat an eye at it.
Yeah, we referred to those. So when I was still doing evaluations, those were learning walks, and I loved them because they were never punitive, but it was about going in and seeing what teachers were doing well. And I think it's really useful if you do that, if you know someone is struggling with a specific X, Y, and Z, to make sure that they get into a classroom of one of their peers that's very strong at that. It's a great way to reward the person that's doing a good job and recognize that. There's two different models I've seen used with this. One where they go in and they evaluate, and then it's visible to the actual evaluator. So the person that's going to be putting their scores in, it won't be used for scoring, but it is visible. And then there's another way that you can do it where it's not visible. So it is completely from peer to peer, and no principal would be able to see that information. Do you think there's one that's better than the other?
I think the peer-to-peer is probably better if you can get to a space where people are comfortable with each other in that way. As soon as you incorporate admin in, people, it starts feeling more punitive, right, wrong, or otherwise. That's just the nature of what I've seen. So I think if you can do anything that's peer-to-peer, like a buddy teacher almost, I think that's where you really, I don't need to know the feedback you're giving each other if you're both getting better. That's not necessary.
Yeah, for sure. You also talked about, like, if you put it on their calendar, you need to make sure that you do everything you can to get there. And that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you as well. Like, how do you stay true to your evaluation schedule? It feels like that was the thing that always got bumped on my calendar, like fires going off, not really a fire, but it could be.
Right. That
But
could
like,
be.
how do you stay true to that? What methods did you use to kind of help you manage what evaluations you had?
So I try to map out at the start of the semester who I have that I need to do what for. And then I will, if it's informals, which for us is a 10 to 15-minute walkthrough, I will typically put those on, like block out an hour on my calendar that just, that's what I'm doing. And the only way I'm not doing that is if all hell's breaking loose elsewhere in the building. Sorry. But really just prioritizing and saying and telling people, like, I can't meet during this time. If something's on fire, get one of the other admin, or let me know if you really, really need me. But I very rarely will break that, just because it is something I want the teachers to know how important I think it is. And the only way I do that is if I keep my appointments with them. And like I said, they're extendeds I put on calendars. I don't hide anything from them. I'm telling them I'm coming in. If something, as soon as I know I have to change it, I will let them know if something does happen. But more often than not, I can prioritize it to be where I need to be.
Tell you, as a former teacher, I really respect that, because if it was on my calendar, I mean, I'm trying to give my best every day, but if I knew you were coming in my room, like I was
Right.
going to have something amazing planned. And so you put this effort, which, I mean, it sounds terrible saying that because we should be doing that every day, but that's not always what happens. So I do think that there's a lot of respect from your teachers when you're staying true to what you say you're going to do.
It makes it a lot easier when you do have to reschedule. They understand that's not the norm.
Yes. One last question before we wrap up. It says, how many teachers do you typically oversee, and how many observations walkthroughs are standard in Indiana?
So the law basically mandates that you have one extended and two short if you're highly effective. If you're effective, then it's 2 and 2. Every district has a little bit different iteration of it. My previous district, I was primary evaluator for 40 teachers and secondary for about the same. My role as associate here, since I don't have kids that I deal with every day outside of just the normal hallway and lunch duty type stuff, I have, I think, 90 on my plate for this year that I will do either informal or formal on. And will be upfront, I took the bulk of that because I felt like that needed to land on me. Again, this is kind of my passion, and I'm happy to go in and see these teachers. If they're a first year teacher, I will do an extended on them. If they're anything past that, I'll do an informal, just 10, 15-minute walkthrough with feedback. But I also will go in and support our department chairs if they have like someone who is struggling. We've got a couple that just need a little extra love right now, and extra eyes on what they're doing, and just a different voice giving them feedback. So it really just depends. But yeah, Indiana typically is 2 and 1, or 1 and 2 if highly effective, or 2 and 2.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate, Dr. Davis, you being here with us today. I think your research, I did have a chance to look at your dissertation and found it very interesting. And it's such an important subject for our teachers. And then that's what's going to impact the learning of our students. For those of you joining us, there will be a recording of this link that is sent out and available afterwards. We also do have a suite of products that help make that process easier. Evaluation is one of them that Dr. Davis, you are familiar with using, that really helps you to get in, do excellent scripting, make sure you're sticking to that rubric and track everything you need to be doing for your teachers. So thank you again for joining us, and we appreciate you guys coming.
Thanks for joining us. If you want to learn more about college and career readiness, graduation tracking, teacher growth, assessment coordination, master scheduling, and staffing, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Until next time.